Welcome everybody to today's special edition of The View from the Top. Again, another edition where we are focused on the awful coronavirus that we're facing worldwide. And I'm delighted to say that my special guest today is Julia Onslow-Cole. Julia is a very senior partner at Fragomen. She is an icon of the industry. We've worked together for a number of years, and certainly Julia knows more about immigration than many people, most people I'd suggest, in our industry. She has advised not just major corporations around the world, but governments around the world. And I'm actually delighted to have Julia with us here today to talk about all the global immigration issues that are going on around the world. Obviously, we won't get into every single location in every single bit of detail, but we are going to give you a quick tour of the world. The aim today is we're going to start off in Asia Pacific, which is where obviously the virus was first noticed. We're going to start off in Asia Pacific. We're then going to move into the Middle East and Africa. We're then going to look at Europe, and then we're going to look at North America. And then later on, we're going to look at some of the trends and some of the issues that we think will be facing us. So, as I said, the subject today is the coronavirus and the global immigration challenges. Now, as is ever the case, what we want you to do is to join the conversation. What's really important to us is let us know you're out there. We want to know who's around in LinkedIn land, who's actually listening to this post, what all the issues are. Give us your comments, ask questions. We want to make this as interactive as possible. So we really want to know everything that you're feeling, your views, your thoughts, what's going out there. But also, obviously, we want to hear from Julia. So, Julia, welcome to this very special edition. It's great to have you on the show. And let's get started. And maybe we could start about, maybe we could just talk about what's going on in Asia Pacific, and you just tell us a bit about. I don't know if you want to give an overview first, then let's dive into Asia Pacific.
Yes, thank you, Brian. Well, just as an overview, obviously the first casualty of a crisis is always clarity, and the situation is really fluid. So it's really important to understand that things are changing, minute by minute. They're deep subject matter experts in every country. But what I'm hoping today to do for you is just give you, a high level overview of what's happening around the world. So starting in Wuhan, which has been on lockdown since the middle of January, it was announced yesterday that lockdown will be partially lifted on the 8th of April. So anyone who has a green code on the widely used smartphone health app will be allowed to leave the city from the 8th of April. And they had in Wuhan 5 days of no new cases. Unfortunately, yesterday they did have one new case. The travel restrictions for the rest of the Hubei province have been lifted for healthy residents. The difficulty in China is that there are a number of new cases of the virus in the mainland. Since the beginning of this week, they had 78 new cases and 4 were caused by infected travellers from overseas. So that's why you keep hearing of this second wave of imported infections. And it's also affecting countries like South Korea and Singapore, which had been successful in stopping the spread of the disease in recent weeks. And because of this second wave, you get these strict quarantine measures, and these have been imposed across all cities in China from people coming back from outside. So in practical advice, we're seeing a lot of clients wanting to send people back, particularly to Beijing. But Beijing is one of the areas that the Chinese authorities are particularly concerned about. And many of the flights are landing in nearby airports. And what's happening is that individuals are screened, and if they are free, if they're well, they're free to travel on to Beijing. But we've had some cases where individuals haven't got accommodation immediately, and they're being put into dormitories or basic hotels. So one thing to point out to people listening is it's really important, if you're sending people back particularly to Beijing, they must have accommodation from day one. The other thing to say is that we've had a few people who have breached the quarantine regulations. One individual went out for a jog and they were arrested by the Public Security Bureau. Their work pass was taken away and they were deported. So you must tell everyone that they have to obey all the quarantine rules. And the final point on China is, although the Immigration Department is actually functioning reasonably well and cities are making processes easier, a lot more online filing, not requiring physical presence, if you require a Category B work permit, where there are additional documents like police clearance certificates, they're hard to obtain because of other countries. So even if the Chinese authorities can process, because of the documents you require from outside of China, this is causing delays. So I could go on to talk about.
But before we do, we'll come on to
yes.
in a moment. But just to let you know, we've got over 150 people listening to us now, and they're from all over the world. We've got Bindu Menon from India, Carol Habib from Italy, Holly Holmes from Houston, Liz Cox from the UK. Oh, I can't read them all out. But from Denver, another one from the UK, from the Netherlands, from Dallas, from Pennsylvania, from Wisconsin, from Paris, from Idaho, from California, Phoenix, Connecticut, India, North Carolina. But please do, everybody out there in LinkedIn world, please do ask us your questions. This is a unique opportunity to, really interact both with each other on LinkedIn, but also to ask questions of Julia. Also, I know that some of you are in countries that are, very heavily locked down. I've noticed we've got people here from Italy, we've got people here from Spain. When we come onto your locations, if you've got feedback that you want to give us, please do also, let us know. But Julia, let's carry on. You were talking a bit about Asia Pacific, and I think you're about to come on to Singapore. So
yes. So because of this second wave that I've just mentioned, things are tightening up in Singapore. So yesterday, Singapore reported 49 new cases, and 32 of those were people who travelled into Singapore. And on Monday this week, they had 54 cases, which was a new record high, because in total, Singapore's numbers are quite low. There's 558 cases, and they're tracking the cases very well. So Singapore announced yesterday that all entertainment outlets will be closed and all bars, and this is going to be effective from tomorrow night. And also, this is very important, Singapore is not allowing transits. So I know lots of people transit in Singapore, so they're not being allowed. And on Monday, the Singaporean government took the unprecedented step of banning all short-term visitors, including tourists, from entering, and all travellers arriving into Singapore, including Singaporean citizens, permanent residents, long-term pass holders. And what you have to do is, if you want to go to Singapore, you have to apply for pre-entry approval. And those people who are, in our experience, are being granted it are only people who are in essential services, which is really defined as transport and healthcare. And in our experience, everyone else is being rejected. It was quite a clever way, this pre-entry approval, of actually filtering the numbers. But now it's really being applied in a different way and quite strictly. And we're dealing with a number of cases, particularly where children at university and the universities have closed and they want to come back to Singapore. So we have a number of those types of cases. Also, to be very clear, everyone must obey these rules, because we have had another very difficult situation we've been dealing with this week, where people decided to leave Singapore and they came back in under the radar. They'd missed all of the announcements, and the Ministry of Manpower revoked their employment passes and revoked the company's ability to sponsor sponsor employment passes for a year. Now, it's getting a very complicated situation indeed, because the Ministry of Manpower say these people must leave immediately. One of them is an Indian citizen, so obviously that's complicated, as we heard from your podcast yesterday, because obviously Indian citizens can't go back to India. But also the Immigration Checkpoint Authority, the ICA, are saying they can't leave because they're subject to a stay-at-home notification. And those are being really strictly enforced. And in a separate case, we had one with permanent residents who decided to go out to the office, and he was deported. So in summary, in Singapore, you have to be very careful. You have to obey all the rules, all the notifications. You can apply for extensions in Singapore. And to date, we haven't had any issues with that. They have a very good online system, but it's a tricky landscape.
Okay, thank you for that, Julia. So that's sort of covering up Singapore. We're getting many more comments coming in now from all over the world. From I think from Spain, from San Diego, Dallas, from Russia, from Chicago, Arizona, Florida. We have somebody shout out to Brian Murray from Citrus Relocations saying we have a fantastic testing facility in Milton Keynes, except nobody here actually knows where it is. So. So maybe that's good that it's kept safe. I don't know. From Chicago, from London, Jack from Germany, or maybe not from Germany. So I hear Germany is actually managing this crisis well. Is that the case? And maybe we'll come on to Europe in a bit. From St. Louis, where I'm delighted the sun is out. And so we're getting lots of comments from around the world. But for guys out there in LinkedIn world, if you've got questions that you want to ask, now is your time. You know, please say hi, and you all are, and we really appreciate that, because we don't know who we're actually talking to if you don't let us know. But if you've got questions, you've got comments, then keep feeding those in as we go forward. Anyway, Julia, I think we're still on Asia Pacific, and I don't know if you want to move on to the Pacific bit of Asia Pacific. And
yeah, I think it might be worth saying a few words about Saudi Arabia.
Oh, of course. Okay.
Before we go, sorry. Before Asia, would you like to? I was going to say Philippines is on a lockdown. Japan has some entry bans, but we could say a few words about Australia and New Zealand. So Australia, the 23rd of March is a ban to all non-citizens and non-residents. So the only people that are allowed into Australia are Australians, people with permanent residence, and New Zealand citizens who normally reside in Australia, and also and the family members of those people, and people on compassionate grounds. So we've made quite a lot of those types of applications, but they are only being applied quite restrictively. There's also a lot of particularly Indian citizens who are stuck in Australia, and we're making representations to the government for those, because the fees to extend their visas, mostly on 400 visas, are very expensive, and we're asking for some leniency on that. And the New Zealand is in a similar situation to Australia.
Can I ask, generally, you talked about fees, and I think that's a really interesting point. Are we generally seeing governments around the world being lenient in terms of fees at this time, or are they still, trying to charge their normal fees?
I mean, to be fair, all the governments around the world are really doing their best, but it's very difficult for them because they're having to react, and we'll come on to that, particularly with the new UK announcements that have been announced overnight. They're struggling because they're trying to act in a timely fashion. And the situation is just escalating so quickly. We haven't really seen any movement, I haven't globally, on the question of fees, but it's something that we're really lobbying for, particularly, as I say, for the people who are on 400 visas in Australia. But I mean, I think that's, it's not that the governments wouldn't be willing to do something. I think that there's been higher priorities, and it's been difficult because a lot of them are working from home.
Okay, so shall we move on now to Middle East and Africa?
Yeah, so
I think you talked about Saudi, didn't you?
perhaps we'll start with the UAE, maybe.
Okay.
So the UAE, which is a very popular place for expats, we've seen gradual increase in restrictions. So first of all, we saw a suspension of visa on arrival, and then effectively it was restricted for everyone except Emirati and GCC citizens. And now no one can enter the UAE, even permanent residents, unless they're an Emirati or the immediate family of an Emirati citizen. And we have had a number of cases on this about what is the definition of an immediate family. Obviously, it's spouse, children's parents, but there is some confusion about who else it could apply to. There's also a hotline that you can speak, but we have had difficulty getting through, and when we've got through, it has just recorded message to say you can only come in outside these very strict rules for exceptional circumstances. And it has been difficult to advise people how this will be exercised. But we had a case of an individual who had permanent residence, and he and his wife flew to Canada. They were not allowed entry into Canada. And then we were in a situation where we were negotiating their re-entry back to the UAE. And because the wife was heavily pregnant, we managed to do that. But there are some, difficult cases like that. Also complicating factors because international flights have been suspended. The UAE authorities have a good record of being flexible in difficult situations, and they've given a number of concessions for extension applications, and they've allowed people to extend in country. Also, this is not official advice, but we have been able to extend visit visas through the tourist agencies. So I think there's less concern about your expats inside the UAE, but it's the ones that are outside that really, want to get back. And I think that, that's a concern at the moment.
Okay, and we're getting more questions coming through. I'll feed you in some of these questions. You may pick them up later in the talk, but I'll just let you know now. Fiona Shaw, she's from United Health Group. She said, "Hi, Julia and Brian. Is there any insight or expectations that the US," okay, so we'll pick this up in the US section, "makes working permissions for those with visas due to expire during the COVID-19 slowdown and government closure, or during the catch-up phase where a backlog is expected?"
Hi, Fiona. I'll cover that in the US.
Okay, and then another one. This is from Rebecca Rosenzweig of EY, and she says, "Hi from New York. Are there any insights on leniency for those working locations temporarily, i.e. those who may be stuck in a country other than their country of citizenship, or where they may have been on business trips and stuck there for several weeks or longer?" Okay.
Yes. So, hi, Rebecca. So that point is really important, and that is really a country by country case. So as I go through the different countries, I'm going to try and pick up that point. But the point that Rebecca made about people temporarily stuck who have been on a business visit, I've actually got a case study that I'm just going to mention now because we're just going on to Saudi.
Okay, and then I'll just read you a couple other comments so you've got them, Julia. This is from Nada at Under Armour, and she says, "Hi, Julia. As this is such a fluid and evolving situation, is there a live map we can access to determine how global travel restrictions might be changing? I wonder if there's a reader-friendly document with real-time updates of how governments around the world are handling new and renewal work permit applications and how companies can maintain compliance during this time."
Yeah. So Nada, there is what we've done at Fragomen. We have a dedicated knowledge team headed by Scott Lee, based in the US. He has a team of people, 20 hours of the 24-hour cycle. They are updating it. It's a free tool to all clients, competitors, anyone who wants it. It's on the Fragomen website, and it covers all of the countries, and it's got all of the alerts. So you can go on there and you can get a real-time update.
Okay, well, let's carry on with the world tour. There's more comments coming in at the time. We've got a huge number of people commenting, which is fabulous, and thank you all for the comments. Keep them coming. We'll pick up some more comments as we go on.
Yeah. So Saudi Arabia. So we can see patterns emerge. So some countries like the UAE, you get gradual increases. In Saudi, it was a very strict approach. Saudi citizens are allowed to come back into Saudi, but for everyone else, there is no entry into Saudi Arabia. And Saudi citizens that do come in are put into a quarantine. Now, what we have is that we do have a number of people, the point that Rebecca from EY made about business travelers. We have some business travelers who are now stuck in Saudi Arabia. And obviously the situation is complicated because of the airlines are being restricted. And we believe that there will be some flights that have been arranged and that they will be picked up in the next 7 days. I think for the UK, they're trying to arrange some flights from Saudi Arabia for next week. But these people are in quite difficult situations. I mean, they're all on business visits and they really want to come home. The other thing to say is that they closed the King Fahd Causeway, and you'll know that that's the causeway that links Bahrain and Saudi. Many expatriates have their families in Bahrain and work in Saudi, and because that causeway is now shut, that has also led to a few cases that we're dealing with. The other thing I want to say about Saudi is obviously really important to obey all the curfews, the quarantine regulations, but also it's really important not to let anyone's visa expire. And if someone is on a visit visa, which is sponsored by a company in Saudi Arabia, and their visa expires, they are liable to a fine, but so is the company sponsoring the visa. Now, the Saudi government are being very generous about extending visas. Normally, you can only do it once. It's typical in Saudi, you get a 30-day single entry or a 90-day multiple entry, but we've been managing to extend these at least twice. So anyone that's on these visas must extend them. Just quickly finishing off the Middle East, the Qatar is quite important. At the moment, you can transit through Doha, but I think that that's going to change. Everyone is banned from Qatar except Qatari citizens, and then those coming in are subject to quarantine. So it's a similar situation like the UAE. And also similarly to the UAE, they're not processing new out-of-country visas because people can't come in at the end.
Okay, and just going on, just with some more comments here. Becky Wood, who I think is from ADP, says, are there any other countries besides Singapore where work visas can be revoked and companies' work permit privileges can be suspended? Maybe we'll pick on that as we go around.
Yes, yes, it's a really good question. I mean, so many of these questions depend on the country, so I will try and pick these up. What I'm doing is I'm going to be, as I talk about different countries, I'm highlighting the ones where we have example of people, going for a jog or going to work, and then they're issued with deportation. But there are some countries taking things extremely seriously. So it does vary from country to country, and I'm trying to highlight as I go.
Brilliant. And Trish McDonald from Westinghouse has said, FYI, all of our pending work permit applications for the UAE were denied. Is that something elsewhere?
Yes, yes. It's really to that last point that I was making, which was saying that they are doing that because they just don't want to deal with any new applications where people would then come in. And in fact, we've had some people just before those tougher restrictions, they left, and actually in transit they were denied. So yes, I'm not surprised at that.
Okay, another comment coming in from Lisa Workman. I'm not sure which company Lisa's from. but she says, can you comment on business travelers stuck in Kuwait?
To be honest, I'm not an authority on Kuwait, but I think the same principles apply as in Saudi, in that it's really difficult to actually leave Kuwait, but there are flights that are being arranged by different governments. So it depends what nationality they are. But say for the ones that we have in Saudi Arabia, different governments are actually putting on flights on different days to help repatriate those.
Okay, and again on Qatar, Mel Marjoram, where's Mel from? Oh, I can't see offhand here. Mel says, business visas, can we extend after the third extension, as we have people there that cannot go home?
Yes, you can definitely make applications. Again, it's a very fluid situation, but you should definitely attempt to make the application.
Oh, and by the way, Lisa, who asked a question about Kuwait, just told me she can change to our. So thanks a lot. We are getting some great quality people on this viewcast, and it's great having you here. And do keep the questions coming. So, Julia, where in the world are we off to next?
So just a couple of words about Africa. So it was announced yesterday in South Africa, there's a 3-week lockdown. The numbers of virus cases are really escalating. As of Monday, they had 400 confirmed cases. Kenya, there's a lockdown. The immigration department's closed. In Kenya, it's a very manual process. And this is one of the themes that we're going to see around the world, that obviously in countries where there's a very manual process, which actually includes the US, it's much harder to keep the immigration applications being processed. So I think we're ready to go on to Europe.
Okay, well let's move on to Europe then. So I think we did have some European questions before, but why don't you kick off talking about Europe, and then I think there'll be some questions coming in specifically on Europe. And again, everybody out there in LinkedIn world, if you've got questions, do keep them coming and your comments coming.
Okay, so on Europe, there are 2 big issues. The first is the travel restrictions. So there is an EU-wide travel ban, and that includes all the Schengen area and other EU countries such as Romania and Bulgaria. But it's really important that everybody understands what we mean by this travel ban. It's the external borders. These external borders, there is a ban. And that came into force on March the 17th. But the implementation of the ban is down to each country. So the EU has issued this very high-level guidance, and they're saying that the guidance says you should admit EEA citizens and their dependents and people with the right of residence. But then it's up to each individual country, because they are responsible for their border. And this is key advice, that you mustn't just stop at the ban. You really have to dig deeper to see what's happening, because what we found is that actually there is some movement that can happen if you actually look at individual countries. So for example, we did have a case of a South African citizen, a very senior person who a company wanted to move into the Netherlands. He had obtained approval in South Africa for long-term entry into Netherlands, but to complete that residency permit, he actually physically had to be inside the Netherlands. So if you just look at the high-level wording of the EU travel ban, it didn't seem that he applied, he would be allowed in, because it says people with the right of residence. But when we negotiated with the government, they said, yes, we will let him in because he has the visa and the process can be completed. So we did speak to our colleagues in Germany, and they said, unfortunately, there would be almost certainly a stricter interpretation. And if the same thing was happening in Germany, he probably wouldn't have been allowed in. But I think it's really important to understand the difference between the high-level guidance on the travel ban and what's happening on the ground. We had a really difficult situation as well, which thankfully we resolved this week, where we had an Indian business traveller who was on a Schengen visa working in the Netherlands, and he went to Malaysia, landed at Kuala Lumpur. Because he was traveling from an EU country, he was not allowed into Malaysia, and he and a group of others, I think there were 60 Indian nationals, were just stuck at Kuala Lumpur airport, and they were stuck from the 18th to the 24th of March, and eventually they were actually allowed back to India. But we had been negotiating with the government in the Netherlands, and we had been asking them, you know, please can we have permission to bring him back? Obviously, he's on a short-term Schengen visa, so he definitely is subject to the travel ban, but you know, this is a really difficult situation. And the other thing to say, and this is a bit of a technical point, but for those lawyers listening, you know, Poland has closed its borders, but it's interpreting the EU guidance on the travel ban as allowing cross-border workers and those in transit. So we believe that to go into Poland, if you had a EU ICT directive but were a third country national, you could probably get into Poland. So it is really important to look at this. The second thing I want to say about Europe, the second point, apart from the travel ban, is day one compliance. First of all, the government is helping employers reduce costs by implementing some social security alleviating measures, so you must be familiar with those. And the second thing is posted workers. If people are leaving countries early, you must inform the authorities. There is no waiver on posted worker notifications, so you must do that. And also, because the ban doesn't apply to EU citizens, we're seeing a lot of clients before the lockdowns, they were actually moving EU citizens from one country to another. We had, for example, medical researchers that wanted to go from the Netherlands to Germany, but you must ensure that you're filing posted worker notifications. That's really, you know, that's really, really key.
Okay.
So I can go into some country-specific things in Europe, if you like.
Before we get there, Julia, let me just read some more of the comments we've got. And some of these comments are actually going to take you back to other countries we've already dealt with. Just to explain for everybody listening, the way that LinkedIn Live works is that Julia and I are speaking live. You see it on LinkedIn about 3 minutes after we've actually had the conversation. So your comments will come slightly after we've talked about a subject, possibly because that's sort of LinkedIn 3-minute rule. But just some of the comments that I've seen coming through, lots of comments. Sandra Corona, she says, expats, she's talking about Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. She says expats coming and going on business trips, they are allowed to enter, but they must place themselves in quarantine. And then somebody said, could you advise, I don't know if this is one you can help with, what's going on in Nigeria? And another question from Trish McDonald, who is with Westinghouse. Can foreign nationals leave South Africa? And then another comment from Sandra Corona in Saudi. She says, from 7 p.m. to 6 a.m. since Monday, there is a lockdown, just to let people know. And then another one in Asia, and then I'll leave the European questions for a while. Ruth Gonzalez Penaranda, she's from, actually I can't see where she's from on my LinkedIn here. It says, we have a Sri Lankan business traveller in transit in Dubai travelling to Africa, but his flight was cancelled as no flights are going out from Dubai and he cannot return to Sri Lanka as their airport is closed. So he's stuck in the airport and we have no idea until when. It just shows what an awful situation people are finding themselves.
Yeah. Well, just to, these are all really good questions. One, the situation in Nigeria, I can't comment on, but I think, as I say, if you look at the Fragomen website, that will have some specific country information about Nigeria. The point about foreign nationals leaving, that's a really good point, because no country around the world, no country is saying foreign nationals can't leave, but for practical purposes, lots of them can't. because they are subject to the lockdown and because of the airline restrictions. So in a way, it's almost unnecessary that even countries that you think would want to say that, they can't say, they're not saying that, but from practical purposes, it's very difficult. For the awful situation where people are stuck in an airport and they can't go anywhere, that's exactly the situation I was describing with the Indian nationals who are stuck in Kuala Lumpur. I think that you just have to keep on negotiating with their country of citizenship, or we were negotiating with India. We were also negotiating with the Netherlands to ask if they could come back despite the EU travel ban. I think that's the only thing you can do, and discretion is being exercised, and I don't think anyone wants anyone left at an airport. It's a dreadful situation. I think that the difficulty is that more and more airlines are actually pulling out of routes, and so more and more we're seeing that we're having to rely on governments actually chartering flights.
Okay, so shall we go on to some of the country specifics in Europe now?
Yes. So France has closed its immigration processing. France is a very heavily paper-based system, and also that France is now having issues with the post. France is subject to a lockdown. In France, you have to sign a government form if you want to leave your house, and there are police roadblocks at roundabouts. In the Netherlands, there is online filing, and the Netherlands are very used to working from home, the immigration department. In fact, it partially works from home already. And so it's been very easy for the Netherlands to shift to full-time working from home. So therefore, the actual processing in the Netherlands hasn't really been badly impacted. And we've had a few really large-scale projects where we've been moving headquarters to the Netherlands with a lot of individuals, and these largely been uninterrupted, the filing of the applications, etc. The thing that I keep saying though is if you're relying on documents that you need from other countries, obviously that slows things down. When we talk later on about remobilization and strategies and planning, it's important to know which countries around the world you could actually get processing done quite quickly. Because, for example, if you're using the EU Intracompany Transferee Directive, it's great to know that the Netherlands is somewhere that you could quickly deal with these applications. I think that it is quite impressive how they had so many people already working from home from the government departments. Also, Switzerland, you can't apply for permits until June the 15th. Spain is in lockdown. The immigration authorities are working remotely, and they're saying that anything submitted before the 15th of March, they will deal with it, but I don't know how long that's going to take. And then you are not allowed to submit any other applications until the 11th of April. Ireland have granted an automatic extension for people in Ireland. That was this week. That's a very welcome announcement. Luxembourg, they're only any permits that expired March the 1st or onwards, or people on Schengen visas they're automatically legalizing their status. Italy, there is electronic processing. There's likely to be really huge delays. There always was a lot of variation from different cities in Italy. They're very, very strict in Italy about people leaving their houses. You actually have to print a document, and if you don't have a home printer, you have to go to the police station to get it. So it's very important in Italy as well to make sure that everyone knows about those kinds of regulations as well. This whole situation is a mixture of immigration regulations and also national regulations.
Okay, so is there more on Europe, or?
Well, I think I ought to mention the UK because we had a bit of breaking news on the UK.
Go for it.
I just want to give a shout out to my colleague Gemma Hislop because she was absolutely fantastic supporter to get me all the information. Immediately it happened. So the Home Office in the UK, right from the beginning of the crisis, were very prompt and responsive for the situation of Chinese citizens who were resident in the UK. But as the situation really escalated, there was a little bit of uncertainty about what the Home Office were going to do. And there were a lot of Indian citizens who were affected by being unable to go back to India. And we made extension applications, but we weren't quite sure. But just in the last few hours, the UK government, the Home Office have said that if you're in the UK legally, your visa has expired, you will not be regarded as an overstayer or you will not suffer any detriment. And last night they released a policy in 2 parts. So anyone in the UK and whose visa expires before the 31st of May, they can make a simple email application. They've got to explain that they're either self-isolating or that they're subject to travel restrictions and can't go home. And you get an acknowledgement of that application and hopefully an approval, and to stay until the 31st of May. And Priti Patel has said that the Home Office can then extend that if the situation is going on. And now the Chinese citizens, they're encompassed in this because the discretion that they had would have ended on Monday. So that's a really, really important new development for the UK. And the second part is that you can make an in-country switch, which is really exceptional. So, for example, we had someone this morning we were discussing who was a Chinese citizen who'd come in to take an English language test and then was going to go outside the UK to file a Tier 2 application. Now he can switch in country. So that's a really positive thing. The difficulty with the in-country switching is that there aren't very many biometric appointments anymore. But you know, the fact that you could do an in-country switch is really important. And the last thing I want to say about the UK is right to work checks, because there's lots of people working remotely and we've been advising clients that Skyping should be fine. We haven't got a full notification of that yet. There's a Home Office stakeholder group meeting on Friday. Hopefully we'll clarify some of these issues, but certainly the alternative collection locations for BRPs, they're allowing Skype. So I think it's safe for employers to rely on Skyping for right to work checks. I hope it's safe.
Okay, I've got a couple of specific comments here on European matters. This is a very unusual one from Shani Morris. Shani is head of candidate experience at Remedium Partners, which I happen to know is a recruitment agency that specialises in bringing in doctors into the UK, into the NHS from abroad. I think particularly from a lot from the Indian subcontinent. And she says, it's Sean from Remedium Partners. Hope you're doing well. Lovely to meet you, Julia. Do you have any advice how we can support all our overseas doctors who are stuck in their home countries wanting to travel to the UK to join the NHS? And also any advice to doctors who are arriving to the UK now everything is shut? So I suppose the point Sean is making is that you know, this is a UK perspective, that we're trying to recruit in doctors to help the NHS and they can't actually get into the country to help.
I think, Sean, that would be something that you should email me or message me on LinkedIn. I'm sure that's something that Fragomen would want to look at to see on a pro bono basis that we could help, because my husband's a doctor and I know firsthand that they need all the doctors that they can at the moment. So I think that's something that we should be talking to the Home Office about. Okay,
that would be great. And Shani, message Julia or let me know. I'll link in with Julia for you too. It is a really important point. Another question from Helen Van Zyl. She's with Baker Shoes from Netherlands and Hungary. And she says, for Hungary, I learned that no work permits are given What about transferring work permits from one employer to a new employer? So the candidate involved is Hungarian with work permit, which needs to be transferred to us.
Again, I can't answer that myself, but please message me on LinkedIn and I'll find out for you.
Okay, and another question, this is from Liz Cox, she's with Atkins, and she's asked, are extensions still being granted in Switzerland?
Well, again, I'd have to clarify that, but I think at the moment there are no new applications. Well, for extension applications, I think the best thing is to submit them, but I'd need to speak to my colleague Alex Patterson, I'm afraid. Again, I really, really don't mind if you want to message me on LinkedIn, and I'll get you the answer from someone that really knows. But Alex Patterson, my contact in Switzerland, she would know that.
Okay, and here's another question. I know you've been heavily involved in all the immigration issues surrounding Brexit, and Brexit obviously had to rear its head at some point. We're talking about Europe. And the question from Brian Murray from Citrus Relocation is, will Brexit transition, in your opinion, be extended? We have people in the EU looking to move this year, and this could prove close to the end of the year to get visas through.
Well, I mean, personally, my personal view is I cannot see how the Home Office could be ready to implement new, any new arrangements. I mean, all the manpower is being taken up in the current situation. If you consider where we are in the year, I personally think that the situation would be extended.
Okay, and here's another question from Michael Rodriguez, who is a UK immigration lawyer. I'm not sure which firm he's with. Michael says this, today the Home Office has released other exceptions to the rules. I heard that some employers want to send a few of their migrants back to their countries on an unpaid leave until the outbreak is under control, but these employers are concerned if this would breach the visa condition, that such employees would not be working, as not being paid. What do you think about this situation?
Yeah, hi Michael. Well, I think that's a very difficult situation. I don't think that's straightforward, and I think we need to see that, because these announcements have only just been made. But as for every announcement, I can think of about 50 questions, and I don't think that that's a very straightforward thing to answer. Certainly, need to think about it.
Okay, and then one last question on Europe, and then we'll move on to North America. And this is from Carolina Saviova, and she's at Alto Vita. She says, hello, Julia. Do you have any information regarding travel restrictions to Czech Republic? The country is under a heavy lockdown currently. We had a number of arrivals planned, which are now pending.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. I can't off the top of my head answer that. But if you had a specific Czech Republic case, just message me, query, I could find out.
Okay, well, let's move on to North America then.
So I think with North America, I just want to caveat it. So North America, more than any other area, is something that is extremely complex, and really you need proper US legal advice. I must say that I have spoken extensively to Charlotte Slocum, who's head of our US consular practice. But the points I'm going to make are really quite high level. The thing is that President Trump declared a national emergency. At the moment, we've got stay-at-home orders in Maryland, Illinois, Washington, and New York. And President Trump, as we know, made a proclamation about the travel ban. Initially, that was for people coming from Iran and China, and then subsequently the Schengen countries plus the UK and Ireland. The first very general point I want to make is that the travel ban applies for people who've been in those countries for the last 14 days. And it has been possible to, for example, if there was like an L1 visa holder, to move them to another country for 14 days, and that way they wouldn't be subject to the travel ban. And it was possible to do that by, say, moving them to Abu Dhabi. But now I've already explained with the pre-entry clearance, pre-clearance, that's not possible. But it might be possible. So it's definitely worth thinking about. The second thing I want to say is that if you're a US citizen or the spouse of a US citizen, the travel ban doesn't apply. But what we have found is there's been a few cases where we've had spouses of US citizens and their ESTAs have been revoked. And the difficulty with that, obviously, is that those individuals thought, well, that means I can't come. But actually, I think it was sort of part of some semi-automated process. Not everyone's ESTA has been revoked, but we've had a few cases of that. But when we have gone to the consulate, they've been very understanding, and they have granted a visa. All the consulates, all the US consulates are shut except for regular processing, but they are dealing with these emergency applications. The second really general point I want to make about the US, it's a very, very paper-based system. They actually have physical paper files. They require checks. They do require wet signatures, although there's been some exemptions, so you can have PDFs. But it's a very heavy paper-based system. And so it's quite difficult in the US to actually move to working from home and online filing. The USCIS is still accepting in-country applications, and you can make in-country extensions. And the other big point I want to make is it's absolutely crucial that you keep an eye on all of the expiry dates, not just for the principal applicants in America, but for the dependents. And there's going to be so many more in-country extensions, because a lot of companies are changing their strategy where they used to want to file overseas. They're now going to have to file in-country because people can't leave. And you've got to particularly look at these expiry dates. And one of the issues that we are seeing is people who are dependents who are dependents and they're working, they need employment-based documents. They're called EADs. And these are normally take 4 to 6 months to be processed. And when they expire, when your EAD expires, if it hasn't been processed before the expiry date, you can't work. So now, because of all the extra applications, because we don't know what if USCIS shuts down, it's so important to look at everyone's expiry date, everyone's dependent's expiry date, and really think about planning and how you're going to do this. And the last thing to say is that those in the US on an ESTA can't normally extend, but there has been some exceptions. Oh, sorry, and one more thing that's really important is that as quite a surprise, premium processing was just suspended. And we have quite a few clients who've got very senior executives who would have otherwise been able to premium process their visas, particularly on O's. And the normal processing time is like 5 months, but they were going to have premium processing. So we're looking at ways to switch them to other types of applications. So that's something else to be aware of.
Okay, thanks. And we're having, loads of comments coming in. Just picking up on one which I think might relate back to the UK, I think, although I'm not quite sure. It's from Alexandra Pearson, and she says, for visa holders parked overseas, will there be an extension of the vignettes? I must admit that one passed over my head.
Yes, is she talking about the US? I'm not sure.
Maybe she is. I'm not sure. Maybe you could just confirm, Alexandra. Maybe it's the US. Okay, well,
I mean, yeah.
Yeah, do you want to take that?
I think I just think the point is that it's really important to look and see whether or not the country is giving any automatic extension, that we've heard of as I've touched some of these countries. but most, even if it's a light touch, you do have to actually do something. So that's really important.
Okay, and two other comments. One is, could you update on the general status of processing at port of entry for Canadian applicants? And the other one was, can you say anything about Latin America?
Actually, it's very remiss of me, but I haven't got anything except a very, very high level overview of Latin America or in fact Canada. So if anyone has any specific questions, yeah,
I think there's a lot of interest in these sessions, and Julia and I were talking earlier backstage, as it were, about coming back, and we'll hope to do another session over the next week or so, and we'll try and pick up on many of these points that.
Yeah, I think what would be good, Brian, is if we actually did a deeper dive. What I'm trying to do is do kind of quite high level, but I think deep dives into countries will be helpful for people.
Okay, well, we'll certainly get onto that. Okay, well, we've gone around the world, and it's been a tour de force. We haven't got that long left, although we might sort of run over a little bit if I can see how many people are still here. There's still a lot of people out. I think there's 140 people, which has gone up 142 people just watching us live. So, and many more will watch afterwards. So there's clearly a lot of interest still in what we're saying. Let's move on. I know another area that we've talked a bit about offline beforehand is what all this is going to do in terms of technology, how technology is going to help us, and indeed technology is going to change the way that the world of immigration is going forward.
Yeah, well, we did have a chat about that this week, Brian. I think one of my partners, David Crawford, wrote this paper with a university recently on the importance of immigration departments around the world and governments to really have the latest technology in the processing of applications. And he presented it at the Global Forum for Migration and Development, and lots of countries were particularly interested in it. And this crisis has really borne out the importance of governments having good immigration technology. And you can contrast the situation so starkly with countries like the Netherlands, where they're used to working from home, but also have really good technology, with other countries that are very heavily paper-based. So, I think it's a really good issue. I think we're going to see a lot of governments after this be very interested in implementing the latest technology and reviewing how they were able to cope in this crisis and what they could do to be better prepared going forward.
Okay, that's great. And I think people out there in LinkedIn world are really appreciating everything that you're doing, Julia, at the moment. Andreas Strakvis from Wyker, great session. Thanks to both of you. Jeff Hook, thank you for the update. Amanda Medenhall, thank you. Great information given how fast everything is changing. Ed Hannibal, I think is Deloitte, and ERC, of course, as well. Bravo, Julia and Brian, thank you. So, I think what you're doing here, Julia, is a fabulous service. Just on the question of technology, I'm personally very convinced that we're going to have long-term benefits, silver linings in terms of technology. I was talking to the managing partner of a law firm, not yours, another law firm, earlier today, and he said to me that they've gone from a situation where maybe 15% of their people were remote working to now 100% of their staff are remote working. Even the switchboard is being done, and the mail is being done from someone's home. But he said, more importantly, the courts have moved to that. Everything that used to be filed by paper applications and have to be printed out and sent, that the courts are now taking PDFs. So they're seeing that that justice itself is changing by technology. And I know, obviously, I'm with a technology company, so this is dear to our heart. But clearly, technology is going to be one of the major beneficiaries or silver linings of this awful situation. But let me move on. I know the other subject that you wanted to talk about, Julia, was what does this mean for trends in immigration going forward?
Yes, I mean, I think the immigration trends, I was thinking on this, it's really more about what we've seen as trends. I think we could just cover this in a couple of minutes. It's really the trends that we've seen, the lockdowns, the entry issues, the exit issues, the processing of extensions, the increasing restrictions, the curfews, the police enforcement. I mean, I was just, what I'm really trying to do is say that if you can see where some countries have been heading, and therefore you can anticipate where other countries might go. So countries that are a little bit behind the curve of the virus, you can see where they're likely to end up. I think the overall message from what we've looked at and looking at all of the countries is to really make sure that you're on top of the expiry dates for people, that you're really on top of the local regulations and making sure that nobody is putting themselves at risk or the company at risk by defying local quarantine regulations or travel restrictions. And that obviously that you're ready to use whatever it takes for poor people who are stuck in really difficult circumstances that need emergency help to leave or to be repatriated.
Okay, we're pretty much out of time. In fact, I think we're about a minute or two over. So, but we will extend. There's one last subject I think I really wanted to make sure we cover, and that's the whole demobilisation. Do you just want to give us your thoughts on, how this is going to happen?
The thing is that I think it's really important, as well as dealing with the here and now, is to think, well, what global strategies should you be employing, mobility strategies going forward? And your business will be looking to see what contracts it needs to fulfill immediately. All of the lockdowns are lifted and the situation starts to return to normal. And I think it's possible to work with your business partners now and your own businesses to try and help them come up with some global mobility strategies for remobilisation. So just as one example, if you take the Netherlands, and for example, the Netherlands are very good at processing, they're likely to be running quite smoothly, quite quickly. You could use the intercompany transferee directive for the people that are in the Netherlands, and you could move those third country nationals on that ICT directive very fast to different countries that you immediately have difficulties to man projects, and you could get them there almost immediately. So that would be like one strategy. There are lots of others that I can think of. I think now's the time to think strategically, to partner with the business, find out what is the business's path to growth after this, and then see how you can support that with a mobility strategy where the speed to landing is going to be extremely important. The second thing is you should really be reviewing your crisis management plans. Many employers that I know had immigration crisis management plans that if things were locked down in Asia, they would just move everyone to the EU. And obviously that's, in this situation, it's not been possible. So you should be reviewing your crisis management plans. You should be reviewing business traveller policy, because now this will have laid bare, how you've been able to identify your people. You should consider that, as Brian says, there's going to be so much more remote working. What are the compliance issues globally for that? And also, you should take this time now to really sort out some of those knotty global mobility projects that we have put on the bottom shelf, like the posted worker notifications. I think it's really important to actually think now about doing that. And I mean, finally, just looking at that whole future global mobility landscape, I think, as Brian said, more remote working, more cost-effective strategies. And that's why things like intercompany transferee directive, it's very cost-effective, as well as bringing speed to landing. Really important that you have, a good crisis management plan in place, and that you can track your employees. And I realise very much, this immigration is only just part of one whole picture of global mobility. But I think, partnering with the business now for remobilisation in the future is really important.
Okay, thank you so much, Julia. And if I just say, in terms of the technology side. I mean, as I said earlier, and I know I come from a tech company, is that the way technology is going to change mobility. I mean, certainly from our point of view at Benivo, we have a tech platform out there that allows people to sort out their own moves with great efficiency and to work with their companies and their relocation companies and their host companies to really manage their moves and learn from each other. And I'm sure that's going to be part of the future. But Julia, thank you so much for taking part today. I'm sure we'll get you back fairly soon, maybe with some of your colleagues as well, some of your clients, and we'll have
that'd be great.
Deep dive into some companies. And thank you so much to everybody in LinkedIn world for joining and participating. It's been great fun and so positive. We will be back. I think probably, I'm not sure, you'll get an email from it, but probably Wednesday or Thursday next week with another session. We'll be back. But meanwhile, all that really remains is for me to thank everybody out there in LinkedIn world for taking part, and in particular, Julia, an absolute tour de force, a world tour. You've been an absolute star, and people are coming. I'm getting comments coming through on LinkedIn saying all kudos for you for giving back to the global mobility community at this difficult time with all this fascinating and really helpful advice. So thank you very much, Julia. Thank you, and thank you.
Thank you for having me, and I want to say hi to everyone and hope you all stay safe. And yes, just stay safe.
I echo that. Stay safe, everybody. Until next time. Goodbye.